Hello, and welcome to the University of Maine Cooperative Extension's Using Frozen Fruit in Cooking and Baking webinar. I'm Lisa Fishman, nutrition professional in Aroostook County, and thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. This webinar is part of our winter series on cooking with the Maine harvest that discusses ways to increase your use of local and homegrown foods. Today, we will be joined by my UMaine food team colleagues, Lori Bowen, Kate McCarty, and Kathy Savoy. The mission of the University of Maine Cooperative Extension is to help Maine people improve their lives through an educational process that uses research-based, knowledge-focused on issues and needs. Our educational programs include agriculture, horticulture, including master gardeners, 4-H youth development, food safety, and nutrition. And finally, we want to let you know that the University of Maine is prohibited from discriminating on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, disability, and reprisal or retaliation for prior civil rights activity. Today, we will focus on using frozen fruit in your cooking and baking. As we are approaching spring, we can begin to think about using our freezer full of frozen fruit a little more liberally. We want to be on schedule to make room for this year's frozen fruit by the time it is ready. We've still got a ways to go until that first fruit is in season here in Maine, but it's still a good time of year to consciously incorporate your frozen fruit into your cooking repertoire. First, some housekeeping. We have our webinar set up so that you can hear and see us, but we can't hear or see you. But we do want to answer your questions, so ask them as they come up for you during our presentation by using the Q&A feature, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Thanks again for joining us. Now let's get started. Well, it's March in Maine. We've hopefully made it through the coldest part of the winter, but still have months to go until fresh fruit is available in our markets and our gardens. But hopefully you followed along with our food preservation webinars last summer and you put up some fruit in your freezer. Perhaps you have bags of rhubarb, strawberries, blueberries, raspberries or peaches or pears, even apples in your freezer. Now is a good time to take inventory and see what you have on hand. Maybe you didn't do much and you're looking for the best ways to enjoy your precious stash of frozen fruit. Or maybe you had more time on your hands last summer and froze more fruit than ever before. What are some recipes beyond smoothies and pancakes that you can incorporate frozen fruit into your baking and cooking? We've got all types of recommendations for using frozen fruit in this webinar today. In discussing frozen fruit and using it, we want to clarify your expectations. Once frozen, fruit does lose its firm texture, so it won't be as good as fresh fruit in, say, a fruit salad. But that's because the cold temperatures of the freezer cause the water inside the fruit to turn to ice. Fruit is mostly water, so the ice crystals then cause the cell walls to rupture. This means when it thaws, frozen fruit will look slumped and be soft. So it's best used in cooking applications like baking or where the texture doesn't matter very much, like in smoothies. Or you can use your fruit in a partially frozen state so the ice helps it to keep more firm. Before we get into more baking tips, we'd like to take a poll. And we want to know, did you freeze any fruit last year? And if so, how is your supply looking? And you may have frozen more than ever, your regular amount, a small amount, or perhaps you didn't freeze any fruit last year at all. We'll give you a couple more seconds here to answer your questions. Excellent. It looks like quite a lot of you did freeze some fruit. A few of you did not freeze any, but most of you froze at least a little bit of fruit, and that's excellent to know. You're very resourceful and making the most of the resources you have available. Great, 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 great to know. So we're going to start with a discussion of what your frozen fruit might look like several months after you froze it. So frozen fruit is recommended to be used within 8 to 12 months. So your earliest season fruits, like rhubarb or strawberries here in Maine, were frozen last June, and they're going to be of the best quality if they are used before February to May. Now, if your fruit is older than that, say you have a bag or two left over from the year before, how do you tell if it's good or not? Well, remember the storage guidelines are for best quality, and foods stored past these recommendations are still safe to eat. They just might not be the best in flavor, color, or texture, or they might not have the highest nutritional value. You do want to look for freezer burn, which is where the fruit has been exposed to the dry freezer air and may have lost moisture. Signs of freezer burn include a gray or white color on the surface of food and the presence of ice crystals. This discoloration is not the same as ice crystals that form on the outside of your food. This ice can be rinsed off and the food underneath is fine. And freezer burned food is technically safe to eat, but it may taste a little funky. So we do recommend discarding any fruit pieces that have been freezer burned, but the rest of the package may be perfectly fine to use. Once you've determined that your frozen fruit is in good shape, what are some clever ways you can use it? Well, here are a few suggestions that we're going to cover. You could use your frozen fruit in baking, thinking about cakes and pies and quick breads and muffins. You could make a compote and add it to your breakfast or desserts. You could use homemade fruit shrubs, which are tasty drinking vinegars that are a nice alternative to sodas. You could cook those fruits down and make fruit-based syrups. Or you could make jams, jellies, and chutneys from your frozen fruit. Okay, let's dive into baking and all the tips you need to know to successfully use frozen fruit in your baked goods. Frozen fruit is great in all types of baked goods like pies, muffins, quick breads, crisps and cobblers, coffee cake, jam bars, cookies, on and on. In general, plan to use fresh fruit instead of frozen if the fruit will remain uncooked in the final dish. For example, frozen fruit will not work as well as fresh in a recipe like a fruit tart. Now, one benefit of using frozen fruit in baking is that all that prep work is already done. So you don't have to peel, you don't have to pit, you don't have to core. All of that was done back when you froze the fruit. Let's answer the biggest question first. Should you defrost or not defrost before using fruit from your freezer? Typically, you can use frozen fruit in its frozen form in baking recipes. It works especially well in a thick batter where it won't fall to the bottom of the pan. So something like pancakes, quick breads, muffins, and cakes. So you can substitute frozen blueberries in equal amounts for fresh berries in that muffin recipe. Frozen cranberries in Kathy's favorite cranberry walnut cake from the Moosewood Cookbook, or use frozen bananas in your banana bread. Okay, we know that bananas aren't necessarily local, but still, we oftentimes end up with big bagfuls of peeled overripe bananas in the freezer. When it comes to making pies with frozen fruit, the fruit will bake up a little differently because it was previously frozen. Frozen fruit will release a lot more of its liquid during the baking process, which can create a runny pie filling and a soggy bottom crust. To counter this, we recommend adding an extra quarter teaspoon per cup of fruit of whatever thickener you're using. This will help thicken your filling and give you great results. And you may also find that you need to bake your pie for a little bit longer to account for the frozen ingredients. Compote, or a thickened fruit sauce, is another way to add fruit to your baked goods and other dishes. You can swirl it into batters or use it for topping baked goods, oatmeal, yogurt, pancakes, or waffles. The basic compote recipe is fruit, sugar, lemon juice, zest, and cornstarch to thicken. Cook until the fruit is broken down and the sauce is thick. Then it's ready to serve. Refrigerate and use within 2 weeks. One of our favorite recipes is Erin French's rhubarb spoon cake from her Freedom, Maine restaurant, The Lost Kitchen. It's a simple yellow butter cake with a sweet tart rhubarb compote swirled throughout it. The cake bakes up with delicious jammy pockets of rhubarb compote throughout it. It would work well with any fruit compote, but you would add less sugar if you were using a sweeter fruit. We will send you this recipe. If you're trying to increase your consumption of fruit without a lot of the additional fat and sugar that often comes with baked goods, we've got a wonderful publication for you called Altering Recipes for Better Health. It has tips for substituting applesauce in for butter and ways to reduce added sugar that will still deliver delicious baked goods. That way, you can enjoy the benefits of adding fruit to your diet without the negative health effects that come with the overconsumption of fat and sugar. So, you'll probably want to check that right out. Okay, next, Kathy is going to talk to you about some additional ways to use frozen fruits.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Next up, we're going to discuss using frozen fruit to make drink mixers. Flavored simple syrups are a great way to maximize the flavor of your leftover frozen fruit stash. In fun ways, you can also create smoothies and homemade sodas, and anything from sangrias to mocktails or cocktails. Simple syrup is actually a syrup made from just sweetener and water. The most basic syrup uses straight up sugar. But you can be creative and use your sweetener of choice. Think about honey, agave, sugar in the raw, and even maple syrup. Flavored simple syrup is a great way to bring flavors to your drinks. Again, whether that's cocktails or homemade sodas. Recognize that these homemade sodas also use less sugar than the commercial counterparts. And we're often asked that question. And I did some number crunching to show us that a regular soda has a lot more added sugar than a shrub, for example. So rest assured, these things are helping you to decrease your intake of added sugars. A rough recipe for a simple syrup would be equal parts sweetener to water, and then the addition of about a quarter of that volume of fruit. So what does that mean? For example, 1 cup of sugar, 1 cup of water, and a quarter cup of fruit. That combination would be boiled, cooled, strained, and then you store the concentrate in your refrigerator. And we recommend that you do use it within 1 month. And to make your own flavored homemade sodas with these syrups, you just want to add a few tablespoons of the simple syrup to your glass, then some ice, and then top that with seltzer. You can make a single fruit variety, like just a plain old raspberry, or you can blend and you can come up with great flavor combinations like strawberry peach. You can also add a few sprigs of fresh herbs to make like a peach thyme syrup, blueberry basil, or strawberry ginger. Really, the sky is the limit for flavor combinations. And when we talk about shrubs, shrubs are really more complex than just a simple syrup, since they do have the addition of vinegar. Shrubs are a mixture of fruit, sugar, and vinegar, and it has its roots in colonial New England, when vinegar was far more common than lemons and limes, and it was used to preserve foods and give them some zing. Rural New Englanders used to drink shrubs while they were working in the fields. The infusion of fruit into vinegar with sugar helped to preserve the flavor and capture the fleeting harvest. Today, they're not only a tasty drink, but a good way to use up any fruit from last year's harvest that you may have in the freezer. Make sure that when you froze your fruit, that you started with really high quality fruit. It doesn't need to be prime or the prettiest harvest, but it shouldn't be overripe or have any mold. To prevent spoilage, you should begin by sterilizing your jar by boiling it in water for 10 minutes. So the basic recipe for shrub is equal parts fruit and sugar. You can also add any complementary herbs, and you want to let the mixture sit refrigerated for a few days, shaking it or mashing it every day to really exude the flavors. And then we strain the mixture and add an equal part of vinegar. And here again is where you can use your creative juices and use any type of vinegar as long as it is 5% acidity. My favorite vinegar to add is an apple cider vinegar, particularly instead of a white vinegar. It gives more of a, it really adds to the flavor profile. So once you've done that, your shrub is ready. And remember that this is a concentrate, so you do want to dilute it with seltzer. I like about 2 tablespoons of shrub to about 10 ounces of seltzer. And once again, the sky is the limit for flavor combinations for shrubs. We've gotten quite creative. Last fall, one of my favorites was a butternut squash and sage shrub. It's a little hard to say, but it was very flavorful. And you can use the shrub anywhere you would like flavored simple syrups, in cocktails, mocktails, or again with just the sparkling water. Remember that you can also use your frozen fruit stash, and think strawberries, peaches, pears, and blackberries in a sangria, or you can also prep them ahead and make a fruit lemonade. We have a great strawberry lemonade concentrate recipe that you can even can. And this is something that Kate and I have talked about wanting to make each summer, but we just never got around to it. So here we're going to join Kate in the kitchen, where she's going to show us how to go ahead and make this strawberry lemonade concentrate with our frozen strawberry stash in the winter instead. So here's Kate.
Thanks, Kathy. So yes, I'm here in our Falmouth demo kitchen, and I'm very excited to be making this strawberry lemonade concentrate. I think one of our master food preservers has made it, Susan, and she told me about it, and it just has stuck in my head ever since. It's been a few years. So this recipe is from Ball. It calls for 6 cups of strawberries, 4 cups, wait, let me make sure I have that right. 4 cups of lemon juice and 6 cups of sugar. So I want to tell you a few things I did behind the scenes. So to begin, I juiced all of those lemons. So again, 4 cups or 32 ounces of fresh squeezed lemon juice. And everyone is very interested in this cute little appliance that I have. So this is an electric juicer for citrus specifically. So it's got like the little reamer on top, you plug it in and it does the rotation whenever you press down on it. And then it has a little strainer that keeps out most of the seeds and pulp and catches it in this basin below, which then comes off for you to pour it in. A friend gave it to me because she was getting rid of it. And I just use it for making large quantities of juice like this. I've used it for another like batch cocktail recipe I made. And then like if you're gonna do margaritas or something. So I don't use it a lot, but when you do need to juice 21 lemons in this case to make that 4 cups of juice, it really came in handy. I couldn't imagine wanting to make this recipe if it required the addition of, or required hand squeezing. So I got my 4 cups of juice and then 6 cups of frozen strawberries. So this morning I measured out the frozen strawberries. They were whole, which is how the recipe has them measured in those 6 cups. So I measured out 6 cups of frozen strawberries and I let them soften in a bowl. And then I pureed them using a food processor. So they do need to be soft enough to be chopped up berries finely by the food processor, because you don't strain it or anything. The strawberries just go right in. So you want it to be really smooth to kind of dissolve in so you don't have chunks of strawberries in your lemonade. Then you add it all together into a pot and heat it to 190 degrees. So strawberries, lemon, oh, and the sugar, which now that I'm revisiting the recipe, I see calls for 6 cups of sugar. I knew it was like two 6-cup measurements and 1 4-cup measurement. I added 4 cups of sugar. I tasted it and was like, it's pretty tart. I think it'll be good, but I'm gonna add those 2 cups of sugar. Get it really sweet. You're gonna go for it, go all the way, I say. But the sugar is just there for flavor, so you could reduce the sugar if you're not as into the idea of 6 cups of sugar as I am. But it will give you more. I'm into the idea of having more of this than less, so. All right, so I'm gonna add my 2 additional cups of sugar, and I turn the heat up so that we can melt this sugar in there pretty quickly, because I wanna show you how to fill the jars for canning. Okay, so 2 additional cups. Now our recipe is correct. And we're bringing this to 190 degrees. So that's a simmer, basically, just below a simmer. And I am checking the temperature with my instant read thermometer. And as with all strawberry products for preserving, this recipe did generate a lot of foam. So once you got the sugar dissolved in there and brought up to 190 degrees, the recipe tells you to remove the foam. I kind of always hate having to remove the foam because it feels like you're wasting this precious product. But it was a lot of foam, so I get it. I'll show you the foam in a minute. Okay. So I added that sugar in. I do have it up to high, but we're at 180 and change, so we're creeping up to 190, which is great. And I removed all of this foam. Okay, oh, also we're trying a new side-by-side view of the front view of my computer and then the iPhone on the tripod. So you should be able to see both a kind of overhead view as well as me in the kitchen side-by-side on your Zoom screen. And if you cannot, let us know in the Q&A box. We tried this last summer and some people complained they couldn't see one of the views. So we're hoping that you can see both because it's cool to not have to switch back and forth. So this is all the foam I skimmed off. It's probably almost a cup of it. And I did that a while ago and it's still pretty foamy. So some people like to eat this. You can refrigerate it and then have it on your toast or something. You don't need to just throw it away. It's just strawberries, lemon juice, and sugar. I don't know that I love the texture, but I'll try it. Because again, I hate wasting those precious strawberries. And the stuff that's in the pot is a very beautiful, nice clear red juice now. Okay, I see comments. So people are like, I cannot see the overhead view. Can't see it. Oh, need an overhead view in the pot. Good point. All right, well, you're gonna see it when it goes in the jars. But I'll drag my pot over to the camera. Hopefully you can see it from the top down. Here. Someone asked about, Chase asked about adding butter to reduce foam. So you will often see in jamming instructions, you can add butter to reduce foam. We like to skip the butter because of all the ingredients that you're adding into your jars, butter is gonna be the one that goes bad the fastest. So we would hate for your perfectly good jam to be spoiled because the butter went rancid in storage. So typically we advise skipping the butter to reduce foam. Okay, so there it is, this beautiful strawberry lemonade concentrate. You can see it has a few lemon seeds in it, which bothers me, but it won't hurt anything. This lemon juicer is great, but does let few seeds through. So I'm using the electric boiling water bath canner, which I love. I say that with caveat though, because I was having trouble getting it to run today because of it kept tripping the breaker. So it draws a lot of power to heat this quantity of water, and that was causing the power to shut off. So I kept having to reset it, but that said, once it got going, it was happy. And it is really nice to not have it on the stove, to have the stove free. It won't heat up your kitchen as much as if you're using your stove. So I do love it. And in here I have 7 pint jars. So I'm heating up these pint jars. The recipe wants the hot strawberry lemon concentrate to go into the hot jars to go into hot water. So I washed these pints up, I put them in the canner, filled it with water, and brought the whole thing to a boil. I'm not doing this for sterilizing purposes because our recipe is canned for 15 minutes. You don't need to pre-sterilize your jar. So any canning recipe that you can for longer than 10 minutes, you don't need to pre-sterilize the jars. Great time saver. And then I'm ready to start filling the jars. So I'm just gonna do them one at a time to keep everything nice and hot. So I got my jar funnel to get all of my precious strawberry lemonade into the jars and not all over the counter. And this is a pint, so it's about 2 cups worth. Now I'll say it again, but for this recipe, it's 3 parts of water to 1 part concentrate. So if you wanted to use the whole pint, you would add 6 cups of water, 6 cups of water to dilute it. So just like a shrub or a simple syrup, this is another concentrated flavor additive. And we're going to 1/4 inch of headspace. So this is my headspace measuring tool. Oh, it's black right up against my apron. You can't hardly see. It's got these little notches on the bottom that measure out 1/4 of an inch. So for a lot of high acid fruit products, it is that 1/4 of an inch, that first step up from the bottom. And this is important to achieve a good seal. So you really want to make sure that it's all the way up to 1/4 of an inch. Perfect. And then I've got a wet paper towel here to wipe off this sugary concentrate off the rim. So we're really going to try and fit that rubber gasket seal on there, so that rubber gasket on there so it forms a nice seal. And then you'll add one of your dome lids, not heated up. So if you have been canning for a long time, Ball used to recommend that you would heat your jars up to soften the compound, but they've reconfigured the compound, done more testing, and see that it doesn't need to be preheated. So again, another time-saving tip. And then add your screw band until it's fingertip tight. So tighten just using the resistance of your finger, not your whole hand. And that's because you want that little bit of air in that headspace we left in there to escape during the canning process. And if you over tighten those rings, the air might not have a way out. We'll find a way out, it just won't be the way you want. So this will help reduce jar breakage and get those seals to form. All right, and then we'll just repeat that process 7 more times. Hopefully 7. I think canning recipes are notoriously off in how much they yield. I definitely made a few that were way shorter, although the more worrying ones are the ones that make way more than you intended. You're like, what did I do wrong? So,
Excuse me, Kate, would you be able to squish that jar a little to your left?
oh, sure.
Not,
Yeah, I'm
it's
not
not on the camera.
overhead anymore.
Beautiful. Thank you.
You're right. What I was doing was trying to get it as close to the pot as possible so that it doesn't go all over the counter. I will sacrifice that so you can all see better what I'm doing. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I eyeball it pretty close to the top, and then I double check the measurement, 1/4 inch. So that first step up from the bottom on this little headspace measuring tool. There we go. And then once I'm happy with that, wipe the rim off, apply the lid, and screw band. And then once we've filled all of these jars, I'm placing them really delicately in here on this little tiny canning rack. I think the rack that comes with this canner is pretty small, so the jars are kind of all crowded in the middle together. You could certainly replace it with a rack that fits in there if you have your favorite rack. Okay, so I'll do one more to show you, and then we'll talk about what happens for the actual canning process of this. So I also like to keep a small teaspoon handy so that, like, now I only need to add a little bit more to get up to that 1/4 inch. It's like a little more delicate work than the ladle can really perform. So that small teaspoon helps you to add some in or take some out if you've overfilled it. And again, we're just really wiping the top of this. You can wipe the outside if you want, but you don't need to try and get inside of it or anything. Okay, 1 lid, 1 screw band, fingertip tight. Jars are very hot. And back into the boiling water bath canner. So I have a few more jars, and once they are all filled and placed into the canner, what I will do is to check the level of the water, make sure it's at least 1 inch above all the jars. That's so when the water's boiling, your jars are fully submerged and being thoroughly heat treated. And I'll put the lid on and turn the heat up. This canner has a setting low, medium, high, and then canning. And the canning produces a rapid boil. So it's on high right now just to keep it heating while I'm adding stuff to it. It'll help it come back to a boil faster. So I'll turn it to canning, put the lid on, and then once the water returns to a boil, I'll start my timing for this recipe, which is 15 minutes of processing. So of a consistent rolling boil. And then after 15 minutes has expired of boiling, You will turn the heat off, take the lid off, and wait another 5 minutes. This is a step that allows the temperature to kind of equalize, so the jars kind of cool down a little bit in the water, although the temperature inside continues to rise for a little bit, so it will continue to kill any germs that might be in there and help produce that vacuum seal. And then we'll remove the jars back onto this rack that they're on, so I wouldn't put them on the relatively cold counter. And I will wait 12 to 24 hours for the seals to form. You can tell the seal is formed by the pulled in lids. So we're using the lids that have the little button in the middle. And when they pop in, a vacuum seal has formed. And that means that the product is safe to keep at room temperature for up to a year for best quality. So tomorrow I'll come back and I'll check the seals. I'll label and date this: strawberry lemonade concentrate, March 2021. And I'll remove the screw bands. So a lot of people are surprised to hear we recommend screw bands being removed during the storage of canned goods. This just prevents them from rusting on, from hiding signs of spoilage or trapping moisture. And then you can keep them on hand for when you open this. Well, and keep it in the fridge. But I think when I open one of these, I'm going to use it all. I won't have any need to refrigerate it. So this is my 5th jar. And as you can see, I'm at the end. Which is sad because I wanted 7 jars. That's what the recipe says it yields. But like I said, you never can really trust those recipe yields for the canning recipe, unfortunately.
Kate, just so you know, your screen, I think, went to sleep on your phone. So you're just on.
Okay.
We just have your.
Oh, spam's calling me. Thanks a lot.
Oh, it's back.
All right, so my last jar, fortunately, meets that 1/4-inch headspace without any, well, I won't say without any leftover, but it's always fine to have leftover. You could make yourself a little soda after your canning session, or put it in the refrigerator and use it within 2 weeks. So, but perfectly makes 5 pints. That's fantastic. If I had added if I had forgotten those extra 2 cups of sugar, I would have had even less. So I'm glad I caught that. And then I'm pulling out the other 2 jars, and I'm going to leave the water in there just because there's at least 1 inch. You don't need more than 1 inch. So I'm going to take out these 2 jars. Take out 1 jar's worth of water. Just don't need any extra water in there because it will take longer to heat up. And there we go. Lid on, heat is back up. I'll wait for this to return to a boil. Okay, that's it for my canning demo. Technology, snafus and all. Now we're gonna go back to Kathy to talk more about using frozen fruit and making jam. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Kate. I'm looking forward to sampling that yummy looking strawberry lemonade product. And speaking of summertime projects, remember that frozen fruit can also be used to make jam. I just think it's a really smart idea to freeze your fruit in the summer and then take advantage of one of our many cold midwinter Maine days to have a jamming session. So you can make jam from fruit that isn't in season. So you can make those combinations of things like a strawberry and a peach, blueberry and rhubarb, affectionately known as bluebarb. So think ahead for next year as far as being able to do that. And then with this year's stash, think about having a jamming session. Ideally, you would plan ahead and measure out your fruit as you freeze it. Because remember, thawed fruit will measure much differently than fresh fruit. So it's wise to, again, measure out if you're looking at 2 cups of fruit, that's what you should pack it up as, and then label your freezer grade bag with that information on there so that you know what you've got. So that if you need to measure frozen fruit, measure it once it is thawed enough to be workable, but not completely thawed, because as you know, the liquid starts to drain out of it. If your fruit does have ice crystals on it, you'll want to let that melted ice drain off of the fruit so it doesn't bring any freezer flavor to your jams. If your fruit does thaw to the point where the liquid is coming off of the fruit, you do want to use that liquid in your jam. There is a lot of flavor in that part of the product. Kate has an example of how she has planned ahead for making jam from frozen fruit in the winter. See the slide to notice that she has measured out 5 pounds of tomatoes that she needs for a batch of her favorite tomato jam. She even chopped ahead the tomatoes, and so it's ready to go in a big gallon-sized zip bag labeled with the date, the quantity, and what the recipe is for. So once your fruit is measured, you can begin your recipe as you would if you were using fresh fruit. Do be aware though, if you typically make jams without any added pectin, you may not be able to achieve a successful set or gel using previously frozen fruit. This is because freezing causes the pectin to break down, so there may be less naturally occurring pectin in the fruit after being frozen. We love using the low sugar pectins for jamming. Those include the Ball, no sugar needed, the Sure Gel, low sugar, and the Pomona's pectin. These pectins all allow you to use less sugar or even to use other sweetener types like honey, maple syrup, which allows for the true fruit flavor to take center stage. The addition of these types of pectins to a frozen fruit assures that you will get a gel with fruit that has been previously frozen. So that is ideally what you want to end up with. So however you choose to make your jam, it's sure to brighten up your spring plates with that fresh, ripe, summertime flavor that only local fruit has. However, please remember that freezer jams will have somewhat of a looser set than traditional canned jams and jellies. Another preserved product that can be used making frozen fruit is chutney. We've talked about this before, and I know we've got a lot of questions in the Q&A box, so we want to get to those. So I'm just going to also remind you that you can make fruit leather using frozen fruit. So if you jump ahead, you'll see a picture of the frozen fruit in our slideshow as well. And I know we've got several questions, so I want to bounce it over to Lori so that we can get to those questions.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yeah.
I'm going to combine Audrey, Sally, and Charlie's question about processing the strawberries. In particular, a question of not removing the strawberry seeds in Kate's recipe.
Yeah, so I, like, before reading or making this recipe, I figured that it would involve making strawberry juice, which would involve straining out the seeds. So I was kind of surprised to see that it just had you puree the strawberries. So the seeds, strawberry seeds go in there along with some lemon seeds, like I mentioned. So this is just going to be a textural issue in your final product. I had like a little tiny bit and I added it to some water, and there is like a little bit of texture. So between the lemon pulp, the strawberry seeds, and the strawberry pulp, it's going to maybe be a little bit different than like a commercial product that's, you know, just flavored. So there you go. It is what it is. You can decide if you like that or not.
So Chase was asking about the butter